Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 28th of April 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined today by David Scott at Northern Exposure, and of course, David will be reporting on matters north of the border. A bit cold and chilly here in Plymouth. We've lost all of that excellent spring sunshine and blue skies and the dry weather. So luckily there does seem to be a bit of moisture to stave off that hose pipe ban and water shortage, which the media was getting very excited about.
Excellent. Where are we starting?
Where are we going to start? We're going to start with the news that Sergeant Alexander Blackman has been released from prison a few hours ago. We tweeted this out last night and we're going to stick by it. I'm delighted that this man has now been released from prison, but I'm extremely cynical about the timing. We've seen the Tory party jump on board this case, claiming that all sorts of MPs were supporting this man. In fact, only one or two of them ever did. And what remarkable timing that this man should be freed just at the start of Theresa May's election campaign. Maybe that's just me being over cynical, but I'm afraid I believe that his plight in prison has absolutely been used by the Tory party for their advantage.
David, let's bring you in at this point, and Donald Trump's first 100 days. This is from Mint Press, and I thought it was, you clearly thought it was pretty interesting as well.
I thought it summarised things really quite nicely. We've gone from Hillary Clinton, "You would be in jail," was what he said on the stump speech, and no, not anymore. No, she's been through enough. Obamacare, rather than being something that must go, he used that as an opportunity to attack the Freedom Caucus in the American government. So that was interesting. Policy on China's changed. Policy on Syria has hugely changed, and that was, of course, the moment when he really acted in a way to show what we're dealing with Trump was not what was being advertised. The relationship with Russia is at least shaky now, when it was actually very positive. A reversal on NATO. NATO is obsolete, I thought, was one of the best things he said during his election campaign. That's now changed, and the priorities regarding Israel seem to be somewhat flexible as well. So, yes, we're seeing a lot of movement between Trump, the campaigning anti-establishment politician, and Trump, the president.
Indeed. Well, let's move on to the UK election. And I'm sorry to have to do this, but I'm really impressed with this BBC article, Brian.
Well, I suppose since I did compliment the Guardian a couple of days ago, or at least one of the Guardian journalists, you're allowed this slight slip. But please don't make a habit of it.
Right, well, it's not really a slip because I'm only impressed with one sentence in it, and the rest of it is a load of nonsense. So basically what they're saying is that they're saying how non-voters can change the outcome of an election, and mostly they're attempting to encourage people that perhaps aren't interested in voting to get out and vote, in the hope that perhaps a few less Brexit MPs would end up in a seat after the election. But there was one particular sentence in this, and that was, had all the unused or spoiled ballots from the 2015 election translated into a vote for a party called None of the Above, it would have won 340 out of the UK Parliament's 650 seats, because the number of non-voters in those areas was greater than the number who cast a vote for the winning party. So this, if you were watching the UK Column News during 2015, was my point at the time. I said we should be spoiling our ballots at the time, making a protest vote. Other people were saying, well, let's set up a none of the above party. They tried to do that, and unfortunately they weren't able to set up a none of the above party because the Electoral Commission said that none of the above was not a permissible party name. If we spoil our ballot, we're protesting the vote. We're making the same point. The Electoral Commission here, as you can see on screen at the moment, has a procedural document on how to deal with doubtful ballot papers in British elections. And the point is that every single spoiled ballot paper has to be examined by the returning officer to decide whether it was spoiled by accident, if maybe it was just somebody a little bit elderly, didn't quite understand what they were doing. But if everybody makes a clear statement on their paper, because at this point, Brian, we do not get the opportunity to make the point that we don't want any of these fools to be representing us.
This is absolutely correct. And I've stood at local elections before, and I did stand as a parliamentary candidate one election, and what an experience that was. The voting, the business about spoiling the votes is write on it something that's clear and easy to read, if that's what you want to do. Because it is not only read in front of the returning officer, it's read in front of the other candidates. So if you've got a message to get across to the political candidates, and as somebody emailed in this morning, who do I vote for? Because I'm either voting for complete idiots or criminals. So somebody with some pretty direct opinions there. Those are the sorts of comments you may choose to put on your voting slip.
So 2 points here, David. The first is it sends a clear message that you don't respect or consider that any of the people on the ballot are suitable. But the other point here is, of course, it prevents an unused ballot paper being used for any kind of voter fraud. Not that we would ever see that in this country.
Quite. Voter fraud is entirely unknown in this country, as I'm sure we all acknowledge. On this point, it was mentioned to me by someone in the political world that the one thing that all candidates tend to do on election night is they read the messages in the spoiled ballot papers. So those things really do get noticed. And yes, it does. It's a way of making quite clear that you do not consent to a system which is essentially a form of slavery, except that you get to choose your slave master once every 5 years, but only in the event of a tie, which never happens.
Yeah.
Perhaps we should just add to this that, of course, we do know that some people want to stand as independent candidates. And if that's what you want to do, then go ahead and do it, because obviously you get a platform for putting the agenda that you think is important across. So certainly our message is, if you've got the finances to do that and you want to do it, go ahead. But of course, time's very short, and you're trying to fight against the massive propaganda machine of the mainstream parties. But what Mike has said is, of course, it's something that's available to all of us. We simply stroll in and make our protest vote. I've got to slightly disagree over election rigging, because I think the country's been riddled with electoral fraud. And of course, Birmingham City Council was described as a banana republic as a result of gross failures there. And it was fascinating, not during the last election, the one before that, when I stood personally to see some ballot boxes in the Plymouth vote where each vote was meticulously folded into 4. And I was fascinated to see that, because of course some people will go into the polling station and screw their vote up into a tiny little ball in case somebody spies what they ticked. But these were very, very neat boxes, quite an extraordinary set of voters.
Yes, I seem to remember the returning officer shouting at us for asking about that.
He did get immensely aggressive, but
yes,
that was probably just because it was late,
early
in the morning, I think.
But David, what's Richard Branson up to?
Well, it seems that he has not got the memo as to how to manipulate the political system of our country. It's meant to be done in secret, but word has got out, and he is actually funding Gina Miller's attack on the Brexit process to the tune of £300,000.
And what does he hope to achieve?
He's looking to target Brexit-supporting MPs in order to skew the future Parliament to his political liking.
Are there not electoral rules about corporate interests getting involved in the electoral process?
I don't actually know. There certainly is when it comes to funding the official candidates and the official parties. This has been done kind of as a flanking manoeuvre. I really don't know what rules apply here.
Yeah, okay, well, we should maybe look into that. Now, what's going on north of the border? John Swinney getting very excited about your local elections on the 4th of May.
Yes, I encourage people, particularly people in Scotland, to look out this SNP video. It's very interesting. First of all, it's enormously patronising because John Swinney here, one of the three men who actually run Scotland, sits down and says in a very affable way that he's going to tell you something that's going to live with you for the rest of your life. You're going to remember this for the rest of your life. This is vital information from Mr. Swinney. And he then says that if you want to achieve something, you have to make a plan. So on the one hand, he's treating the people of Scotland like idiots. On the other hand, though, it's very interesting that all the things he talks about involve planning, and he's completely incapable of conceiving of a country without a plan. That would be a country of liberty.
Well, just on the tweet, there is a link there to a website. I initially misread that. It said "make a plan to vote." I thought, but actually, it's "make a plan to vote." So I had a look at the "make a plan to vote" website, and here it is: plan your vote. It just seems like an attempt to gather up as many email addresses as they possibly can. I mean, why would anybody sign up to this website? Why would people give their personal information to the Scottish National Party?
I really don't know. It's all the party colours, it's all the party logo, and the party. We've passed peak nationalist in Scotland, and the totalitarian aspects and wishes of that party are starting to dawn on the Scottish people. And yes, I think it's all downhill from here. But they're certainly trying. They're trying to get as much of the vote out, which is fair enough. But it was a very strange and patronising address to the camera by Mr. Swinney.
Okay, named person then, and Mrs. Scott has had another article published.
Yes, my dear wife has, as you know, is involved in the No to Name Person campaign as part of Times Trust, one of the charities that's part of the campaign. So there was a piece actually in Third Force News by Mr. Swinney that she took some exception to. So she did a response piece, which was published, I think, yesterday. Mr. Swinney's piece has got 7 likes, and I think the last time I checked it was about 210 likes on Leslie's piece. So we seem to be winning the hearts and minds battle. I'll just read you the final paragraph or two. She said, the people believe that the state guardian scheme is fundamentally wrong in principle. Wrong because it is not and should never be the place of government to dictate to parents how to raise their children. When government starts to view their duty to oversee, monitor, assess and judge families, forcing on parents state-approved guidelines that carry swift, damaging, even permanent sanctions for those who do not comply, then we are staring the reality of state-approved parenting in the face. The truth in regards to state guardian scheme is very different to the propaganda put forth by the government and the state agencies. She finishes, if the Scottish Government is being accurate in its claims of state guardians being voluntary and an entitlement, then make it an opt-in service. Better yet, Mr. Swinney, scrap the whole scheme and show the parents of Scotland that you truly believe that they are the best people to raise their children. So yes, that campaign goes on, and we're still waiting on the Mark II named person to be announced by the Scottish Government safely after all of the elections.
Okay, and well, sticking with Scotland, then we'll move on to police matters. And first of all, we've got this article from the Society of Editors: "Snooping row police knew of need for judicial approval." What's this about?
This is police snooping on journalists. This is the police are monitoring what journalists are doing and writing and thinking and investigating, because they don't like the negative publicity. So it's a very worrying development that we're starting to see Police Scotland take an interest, an active interest in the free press.
Yep. Okay. And Alan Cotton then, a whistleblower at Police Scotland. The Scottish Sun here, ex-cop on the brink of suicide after being fitted up by anti-corruption officers over murder bid case. And we have another Scottish Sun article: anti-corruption cop puts fake info into crime report in revenge bid over a colleague who made a complaint about her. So those are two quite different headlines there. give us the background to this before, because we've got an interview with Alan Cotton that we're going to show in a second. But give us the background to this case first, and why the media seems to be having trouble deciding which way it wants to go on the story.
Well, there's two stories here that both regard the counter-corruption unit in Police Scotland. A couple of things seem to be coming out of this. Firstly, if you are a whistleblower within Police Scotland, if you see something that's wrong, and you do the right thing, then the system is used to criminalise your behaviour. One of the things we're seeing is the use of data protection laws. The data protection laws are extremely vague and woolly, so it's difficult to know exactly what is legal and what is lawful. This has been exploited to target whistleblowers and target people who are seen as troublemakers, because they're dealing with confidential data the whole time, and they could be accused of any number of crimes under data protection laws, and then sucked into an investigation with all the pressure that brings on them as a means of silencing them.
And Alan Cotton was subject to this kind of behaviour.
He was, and many other reports are in the press of policemen being pressurised in similar ways. So one thing happens is your lawful conduct is criminalised, and the other thing that happens is if you complain, then that is viewed as a starting a vendetta, and the counter-corruption unit seems to be targeting people who complain for special attention.
Okay, well, you spoke to Alan Cotton earlier this morning, so let's have a look at what was discussed.
Alan, could you give us the background to the nature of the crime that underpinned all of this?
The background story, David, it was in relation to an attempted murder in the Ayrshire area of the west of Scotland, and there was a firearm used, and in fact other weapons, and the victim nearly lost their arm as a result of a machete attack as well. So it was a very serious incident. My involvement was more of an intelligence scenario, where I was able to assist the senior investigating officer of that inquiry with some relevant intelligence. Now, I accept, and I've always accepted, that I was not directly tasked to working on that particular inquiry, Operation AMP, as it became known. However, my duties as a police officer didn't take me away from that situation at all, and in fact, I was duty bound to assist that and any other investigation that may be ongoing within any area of Scotland. So that was my position at the time, and I maintain that position as well.
Yeah, so this was information that you got through contacts that were out with your normal police activities, people you knew who came to you because they trusted you. Is that's what happened to you? Yes.
Oh yes, that's absolutely accurate. I remember reading that statement from the witness, and I became quite emotional at that point, because, as I say, it was really ironic that I was being accused of corruption, when in actual fact their position was that I was the only officer.
It was your trustworthiness that had got you there. So this witness approached you,
Yes.
and how did you assist the intelligence gathering?
Well, I've yet to find out how I might have done it differently. However, the police took the attitude that I should have done it differently. Now, I assisted by immediately contacting the senior investigating officer who was in direct charge of that Operation AMP, and appraised him of the information that I had, and I did that on more than one occasion. And
then you had some direct contact with the Fiscal's office, is that correct? The official state prosecutor in Scotland?
Yes, subsequently, the witness that I had been dealing with became a Crown witness in that actual attempt murder trial. Now, a Crown witness affords you some protection, of course, and interfering with witnesses is a very serious crime, as is threatening Crown witnesses. And indeed, that was the crux of why this witness contacted me. By this stage, he was in ready contact with the Fiscal's precognition agent, and who he also seemed to have a good working relationship with and trusted. And he, as a result of a failed attempt to contact her directly, attempted to asked or spoke to me in an attempt to try and make that connection, to make her aware of some other issues that he was having, which was indeed, as I referred to, as I inferred earlier, his life was being threatened, as was his family's at that time. A threat I took very seriously, as did the fiscal preconditioner officer.
So that all seems entirely appropriate. So what happened with the fiscal's office? How did that proceed?
Well, it would seem entirely appropriate to a reasonably minded person, but it seems that some people in the Procurator Fiscal Service don't think so, and I didn't think so at the time, and some of my former colleagues didn't think so either, in particular the Counter-Corruption Unit, who I was referred to by a senior person in the Procurator Fiscal Service at Kilmarnock at the time.
And what happened to the officer, the fiscal's officer that was dealing with the case? Did she face any censure?
Ultimately, yes, she did. She was removed from working on that case, and in finality, eventually left the service.
So you were reported for passing this information on. You were reported to the Counter-Corruption Unit. What for?
I've yet to see a statement from the person who made that report, although I know the person's name. But there was never a statement was never obtained from that person, which I found particularly strange and totally against procedures. So I'm only able to go with what the police tell me that the concern was, and the concern was that my communication with the Fiscal's Precognition agent was inappropriate. The resultant charge against me was one of a data protection offence, section 55, totally unrelated to the actual initial contact.
To me, that all seems very, very strange and entirely counterintuitive that should be the case. But passing that on just for the moment, how did the Counter-Corruption Unit proceed with this? Were they reasonable? Were they fair?
Entirely the opposite. Despite from the beginning, I totally divulged my involvement in full. I never hid any of my actions, and to this day I'm proud of my actions, and I told them that at the time. I said, despite the fact that I'm now sitting in an interview room as a suspect, I can tell you now that if the same thing happened again tomorrow, I would do the same. And I'm still saying that 7 years later, whilst it's still ongoing, that I would still do the same. As far as I'm concerned, I did the right thing for a member of the public whose life was in danger. So
this was an attempt to criminalise that action that you took. You were acting to prevent potentially a murder, because it's extremely serious and an entirely credible threat. So you're acting there, but that action by you has been criminalised, because we're talking about potentially a criminal conviction. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. The threat was very real, considering that there was firearms used in the index offence. Then you're absolutely right that was a very real threat. So that being the case, I think it was incumbent upon me to make sure that witness received the very best advice and attention from both the police service and also the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service.
And how did things proceed with the Counter-Corruption Unit? Did you get anywhere? Did you end up going through complaints procedures? How did that resolve itself?
Well, to be fair, it's yet to be resolved, because we're now at the stage where we're in the middle of an employment tribunal. But what I will say is I've now had the luxury, which I never had before, of being able to read the evidence section of the standard prosecution report that was submitted against me by the Counter-Corruption Unit. And to say that it's untruthful is mild. There is a direct contradiction in the police evidence that they present to the Procurator Fiscal. From that to what the witnesses actually say. Now, the witnesses' statements were obtained by the same officer in the main who wrote the police report. So how there can be such a contrast in relation to what the witnesses said in statement format to what they've been paraphrased as saying by the reporting officer, well, I would leave that up to anyone to cast their eye over. And I think, again, any reasonably minded person would realise that that's a deliberate attempt to blacken my name and, in fact, to criminalise me.
So you took some action in terms of making complaints about the way the counter-corruption unit was proceeding. What did you do, and how did that proceed?
Yeah, of course, I was unable at that time to find out exactly what the report said, etc. It's very much a cloak and dagger operation, and to some extent, I accept that in the event of an actual corrupt police officer, then there has to be some or a large degree of secrecy around that. I accept that, but in my case, I was unable at that stage to find out what was written about me. That was fine, but what I did complain about was my treatment by them and the punitive approach that the police took as a result of that. My complaints centred around how they handled the inquiry. I think right from the start, as a detective of many years' experience at the time, I realised that how they handled it, how they were handling the inquiry was inherently wrong, and I complained about their actions on several occasions. It's been accepted now that I have made 5 protected disclosures or whistleblowing declarations to Police Scotland, 3 of which came before the submission of the police report by the counter-corruption unit. And it's my position that report was written in such a manner simply as a result of me having the audacity to complain about the counter-corruption unit.
And was there any other response from Police Scotland to as you were complaining and being this troublemaker, as they maybe perceived it? Was there any other action taken against you?
I was subsequently cleared of any criminal act by the senior procurator fiscal at this time at Glasgow, who was now in charge of the case against me. He accepted that I had a policing purpose for doing what I did, which I'd said all along, and could have saved the public purse an awful lot of money had they properly investigated that claim.
But essentially on the criminal charge against you, then essentially no case to answer. That was the conclusion, yeah.
Case was deserted at that stage, but subsequently from that, I was then investigated from an internal investigation point of view.
On what basis? For what reason?
There were a number of charges: telling a willful falsehood, bringing the force into disrepute, and 2 or 3 other charges.
And this came from, was this the counter-corruption unit or a sort of or mainstream Police Scotland? Were you dealing with the sort of chain of command?
From their sister department, who were what are called the Professional Standards Department. The Professional Standards Department for information sits under the umbrella of the one chief superintendent, together with the counter-corruption unit. There is a slight division in that the Professional Standards Department are supposed to look at non-criminal activities of police officers, which in my case I subsequently came under their auspices because it was obviously agreed that I had not committed any criminal offence. So I then came under the microscope of the Professional Standards Department, whereas before, when it was suggested that I had committed a criminal act, I would then come under the microscope of the counter-corruption unit. That's, in rough generic terms, that's how the division of labour works between those 2 departments. But they do come under the same umbrella, and they work out of the same building, or they did, and at that time out of the same corridor in the same building.
So you've gone through a process where there's been an attempt to criminalise you. There's been an attempt, a concerted attempt, to imply that you are unprofessional or unsuitable for the police force or some other, form of inadequacy in your work as a police officer. And this all comes from you taking action to address a plausible, realistic threat of murder against a witness to a very serious attempted murder. And you're seeing as you're complaining about the treatment to senior management, you're not getting support from senior management? Is anyone in your corner in Police Scotland?
To be fair, when you come up against the counter-corruption unit, you find that everyone runs for cover. It's been said before by colleagues, and it's the most accurate quote I've ever heard about the police. And the quote goes along the lines of, as a police officer, if someone points a gun at you, I have the full support of every member of that organisation. I'll have a full firearms team. I'll have the on-duty superintendent. I'll have an ACC. I'll have a support unit, and I'll have every colleague that's close by will come to my aid within seconds if they can. if someone points a finger at you in Police Scotland or Strathclyde Police at the time, you're on your own.
This brings us to the most troubling question of all, which is why? Why would an organisation turn on one of its own in such, bizarre circumstances, and without any justification? Why? There has to be a why. Do you have any idea of what the why might be?
Well, you could theorise all day long about the original reason for looking at me, and it is the opinion of others that the Operation AMP was deliberately flawed in an attempt to protect allegedly a paid informant. Now, subsequent to that, my treatment thereafter was purely and simply as a result of me complaining about how I was treated by the counter-corruption unit. But the actual index offence, if you like, the attempt murder, as I say, it is the position of others, including my defence lawyer at the time, who wrote to the Proctor Fiscal and told him this, that he was of the opinion, as were some of the witnesses, that Operation AMP was deliberately flawed.
Alan Cotton, thank you very much for this today. It's an extremely concerning situation when you have the people charged with ensuring justice treating law-abiding people, including law-abiding police officers, in this way. I want to thank you for your time today, and hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss this and look at it in more detail in the days and weeks to come.
David, thank you very much for taking us through that interview, and an extraordinary interview. A very brave man, immense courage for any whistleblower to stand up. But of course, when you point a finger, as he says, at the police, then they can bear down on you with a particularly unpleasant force and intent. While he was talking, of course, in my mind was Metropolitan Police Officer and whistleblower John Wedger, who's also had years of abuse from the Met Police for blowing the whistle on the police, covering up the abuse, trafficking and deaths of children. So in this particular case, a serious investigation, which clearly somebody didn't want to happen. So somebody was protecting other personal persons for whatever reason. John Wedger, it would appear that the establishment protecting its own over the abuse of children. We're at a point where we're seeing the police breaking down as a body to uphold law.
Yes, it becomes entirely arbitrary. It becomes a case of, we've long lived with show me the judge and I'll show you the law, but it's now becoming show me the bureaucrat and I'll show you the law, which is a lot worse.
Yeah,
it's all done in secret.
And the other thing that perhaps we just remind our viewers and listeners, that in Scotland, I've got it on another screen here, we've got the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, and the lady is called Kate Frame. She's straight out of the Procurator Fiscal's office, and she's appointed by the Scottish Government anyway. So absolutely no separation of powers north of the border, which is such an unbelievably dangerous situation, particularly when you have one party with all of the power.
Yes, no separation of powers at all. Everything must go through the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, which have enormous power and report to are run by the Lord Advocate. The organisation that's meant to oversee them is run by a 20-year veteran of the Crown Office who reports to the Lord Advocate. There's no separation of powers.
Yeah, and I just want to get in, of course, that we know that the Chief Constable of Wiltshire Police, Mike Veal, remains under huge pressure. The establishment clearly wants him to drop his investigation into Ted Heath and abuse of children. I know that some members of the public have been in contact with Mr. Veal over the last few days, and not only is he prepared to say that he's still under immense pressure, it's clear that he really does value support from the public. So I think the onus is on us. It's up to all of us to get our support into these very brave policemen, whether they're Met Police or north of the border or Mike Veal. If you haven't already done something to show your support with these individuals, then we need to do it.
Okay, let's move on to the Middle East and Syria. And we mentioned this yesterday, David, but we'll give you the opportunity to make a comment. Israel hints it was responsible for Damascus airport explosion. What are your thoughts on what happened yesterday?
it's extremely worrying, and we're seeing less and less clarity as to who's actually on whose side. We've got Israel's bombing Damascus airport, and it's allegedly Hezbollah as a target, but there could be collateral damage. It's across the international border. It seems to be guaranteed to escalate matters. And the same week we had a situation where ISIS accidentally fired rockets into Israel. I think one rocket or shell, and then apologised. If you accidentally shoot at an opposing force and then apologise, that would mean that's your ally normally. Not in this case, obviously, but odd, don't you think, that ISIS should be apologising to Israel for a stray shell or a misdirected round?
Well, I would say not, David, because of course Israel has been treating ISIS wounded for quite some time now in their hospitals.
That is a point. They have been doing that, and it would be far better, I think, if we actually had a situation where we knew clearly who was on whose side in this part of the world, but it's getting ever harder to know.
So one organisation whose side we know who they're on is the White Helmets. At least we know whose side they're on. The British government perhaps doesn't know whose side, or at least not publicly anyway. They're not admitting whose side they're on. But Maria Zakharova here from the Russian Foreign Ministry, absolutely clear that she understands whose side the White Helmets are on. The White Helmets not only feel at home on territories controlled by Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State, she said, but also openly express positive attitudes towards them, provide information and even financial assistance to them. There is documentary evidence proving that White Helmets members participated in some operations carried out by Jabhat al-Nusra, as well as covered up the signs of civilian executions. Well, of course, that is the point that Vanessa Bailey, 21st Century Wire and the UK column have been making strongly for about the last 2 years. So it's good to see that getting some acknowledgement. But this was Boris Johnson's response. Well, actually it wasn't, but this would have been Boris Johnson's response if he had made any public response to this. He said, "I've given them, the White Helmets, over £40 million so far, and I can assure you that most of that was in non-humanitarian aid. Children were harmed as a result of my funding terrorism." That's what he would have said in response to Maria Zakharova if he had made any public statement. And this is a key point, of course, this man standing for re-election. And I think people in his constituency need to consider his position, because the fact is he is unapologetic for funding the White Helmets. And as Maria Zakharova said, we have no idea where that money went. He has admitted, or they have acknowledged, they have stated that money was non-humanitarian aid. So what was it for? The White Helmets is supposed to be a humanitarian organisation. He has many, many questions to answer, Brian.
I think this is an extremely devious man, and I've said this before. Many people regard him as the sort of buffoon, the idiot. I think he's an exceptionally dangerous and devious individual. Not only not to be trusted, but utterly ruthless when he thinks the public can't see him.
And just briefly here, the government panicking a little bit because, of course, they've got deadlines with regard to legislation before the dissolution of Parliament on the 3rd of May. So they've pushed through this public consultation on the UK government's future legal framework for imposing and implementing sanctions. The government concerned that sanctions that have been imposed on Syria and on Russia in particular, that those sanctions have been imposed via other bodies such as the European Union. So they want to repatriate the ability to impose sanctions themselves. But David, this was an interesting article in the Times. Headline: ISIS fighters killed by wild boar as they hid waiting in ambush. And you pointed out this article, clearly a satirical website, but a fantastic headline anyway. Squeal Team 6 goes full bore.
It was wonderful. I mean, we're seeing here, people are saying we've got to get more hoofs on the ground. There was a photograph of a pack of butter with a goat on it, and it just said underneath, "Who are you going to call?" When you see people laughing at the most violent and awful aspects of our society. It's not something to be concerned about. Laughter's on our side. When we look at these people and no longer fear them, laughter's a great weapon, and it was a nice.
Yeah, well, that is absolutely correct. Shall we move on?
I think we should. A reminder, AV8 coming up. We're doing our best to support the good work of Ian Crane. He's really worked exceptionally hard, particularly on the subject of fracking. So if you haven't yet got a ticket for his event there on the 21st of May, please get onto the Ian R. Crane website and get your ticket. I'd also like to say a big thank you for the BCG supporters who've now started to sign up to the monthly donations. I can see that those are starting to come on board. We have pushed out a thank you to everybody who attended. You should get an individual email from the British Constitution Group to thank you for coming to that event, and also to say thank you very much for that very generous support, which is going to enable BCG to help push actions in the lead up to the elections. And David, you were keen that we put this one out. Andy Peacher has got his child sexual abuse conference on Wednesday the 3rd of May in Perth, and that's at the Station Hotel.
Yes, that's the Fresh Start Foundation. This is the victims and survivors of child sexual abuse in Scotland, having lost confidence in the government inquiry, are now looking to make things happen for themselves, where they can be sure it will be independent and it will be fearless.
Yeah, excellent. Now, we're just going to recap on what we started to talk about yesterday, which is the events around our local police commissioner down here in Devon and Cornwall, a lady called Alison Hernandez. And we pointed out that members of the public were concerned that as an investigation into election expenses was going on, which was being controlled, led by the Independent Police Complaints Commission, the subject of common purpose had come up. We put up this email from a member of the public where they were saying, well, hang on a minute, because West Mercia Police, who are supposed to be investigating, we've had one of your common purpose colleagues there as the Assistant Chief Constable, a gentleman called Chris Singer. We'll bring him in. He's done the common purpose course. He's waxing lyrical about vision changing journeys. But of course, the key thing is we know that people who are involved with common purpose work together in networks where their links and collaboration is largely unseen.
And it is the networks which are the most important aspect of this.
It is the networks, yes, because of course you don't know who's involved, although we have put out thousands of names that we discovered. When you deal with a group of people, you have no idea who is common purpose and who is meeting and talking behind closed doors. And Alison Hernandez, as the Police and Crime Commissioner, is a graduate herself. But the former Chief Constable of West Mercia Police said he couldn't see any reason to believe there was any conflict of interest. Well, we dug a little bit deeper, and we were very interested to see this. Somebody had put in a freedom of information to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, asking for them to reveal details of common purpose expenditure. Back came an invoice for the training of one of their people. But of course, what we were fascinated at was the fact that the moment we talk common purpose, IPCC goes into secrecy mode, and the public's not allowed to know who is involved in common purpose in IPCC.
So that document, half of that document redacted?
Half of that document redacted. And there's a little bit more to this, but at the moment we've asked IPCC whether there's any form of collusion or collaboration between them and Common Purpose, and we're waiting for a response. Alison Hernandez herself has written to a member of the public. She says it's all independent. The IPCC are wholly independent of both the government and the police. Notice she doesn't actually mention Common Purpose, which is the key point we're addressing. But she says it's not surprising that there were officers from Devon and Cornwall Police in West Mercia, because they are very good officers and they go to many other forces. So let's have a look at this. This is how Alison sees herself, and these were her initial comments. If I just read you through those, she said, "It's clear that no police and crime commissioner can be investigated by their own force, which is why West Mercia Police was chosen to investigate my case." Now, we're interested in the fact she is a graduate of Common Purpose. Here's a colleague who moved across to West Mercia Police and was, we know, involved at some level in the investigation into her. And of course, he's a Common Purpose graduate as well. IPCC, their values are justice, respect for human rights. There's that word, Mike, independence. But we can now show that they're connected to Common Purpose. But the former Chief Constable of West Mercia saying he's satisfied there's no conflict of interest. And just so that we understand the problem, here's the Chief Investigator from IPCC, Julian Blaseby, who's also a Common Purpose graduate. So Common Purpose advertises that people work together, they meet in secret under Chatham House rules, but when we get an investigation, it doesn't matter. Let's look at it this way, because one of the things that IPCC has been happy to boast about is its investigation for Hillsborough when it investigated Freemasons who were connected to that event. So a major article, IPCC, saying, well, we're not having any nonsense here. We're going to investigate this secret society. But the other side of the line, when it's Common Purpose, even when IPCC is itself involved with Common Purpose, well, we're going to investigate the Freemasons, but not investigate Common Purpose. I find this deeply worrying and very offensive, that we've got dual standards of a particularly unpleasant form. And once again, we can show with evidence anywhere there's trouble, we've got Common Purpose. It's the key thing. You don't know what these people are doing because they meet in secret and pass information behind closed doors. It needs stamping out, David, I think.
Certainly does. The theme of secrecy and behind closed doors is coming out in so much of what we've talked about today and so much of what we're seeing. And also in people not knowing what right and wrong is. We are seeing the rise of an ethical standard that depends on feelings and arbitrariness and has no anchor and allows people no ability to resist wrongdoing within organisations, and it just gallops forward ever faster.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Well, there's a little more work that we've done on that particular investigation, but we're going to sit tight at the moment and see what response we get from IPCC. And we'll obviously keep viewers and listeners informed. David, with an eye on the clock, we'll say thank you very much for joining us, and do thank the policeman for being kind enough to speak to our audience today. I'm also going to say thank you to people who've been sending donations to the UK column. We received another one this morning. That's a very nice end to the week, so thank you very much to the gentleman who sent that in. And also, I know quite a few people asking about the Dohertys and what's been happening with them. I'm pleased to say that a couple of days ago we did get an email which has brought us up to date with what's happening to them. I'm very sad to say that they're clearly in dire straits, but having emailed back, we're now waiting for further communication, and we will report once we've got proper communications established again. What I'll add to that is that if anybody is under immense pressure from the establishment, by all means, move location. We quite understand that this is necessary, but do not go into hiding. The thing to do is maximum publicity so that people can be brought around you. If you run, if you hide, you're on your own. It's very difficult to give help. So that's it for this week. We will be back on Tuesday. Obviously, Monday is a bank holiday. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. Bye-bye.